Welcome into I Said What I Said. I'm Brad Wakai. That's Tyson Gentry. We're going to go through the College Football Playoff Championship reaction episode here. We got a ton on this plate. We're going to talk about Ohio State. We're going to give our 12-team playoff thoughts at the end. I know this isn't what this show's about, but I got to wrap Penn State, right? What happened this season from the Penn State perspective. We weren't able to do a show for a while. I had a wedding that I was at, and Tyson had something going on. And so, we kind of disappeared on you, so we apologize for that. But we're back. We're going to tell you what we're going to do at the end of the show for our offseason. We're not just dumping college football. Yes, it's college basketball. Yes, it's NBA, and that's kind of where we focus our attention. But we're going to do a ton of more football stuff and a ton of more college stuff. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy that, and we'll kind of lay out the roadmap for you there. But Tyson, how you been, brother? It's been a while.
Yeah, I know. It feels weird sitting in the chair talking to the microphone. Apologies for the delay here and hearing us in your ears. If that's what you'd like to do, we sure appreciate it. But we are back just in time to recap Brad's favorite college winning the national championship over his second favorite college.
So Tyson being a little tongue-in-cheek there. Ohio State, they beat Notre Dame 34-23, and the score indicates that it was a close game. This was not a close game. I mean, Ohio State kicked their ass. The first drive, Tyson was texting me. I had some buddies who were on the Notre Dame side, not thinking they're going to get blown out. It was like, wow, what a drive. And I'm like, I don't know. I think that's kind of all they got. They had to do 2 4th-down conversions. Riley Leonard ran the ball like 9 times on that drive, and they scored a touchdown, took 9 minutes off the clock. And I was like, I think that's kind of, you're laying on your back and you're wounded and you just start shooting your bullets and just hoping you get out of the situation. Notre Dame did that in the first drive because Ohio State went down and it was over from there. I know people are like, well, they had a chance to tie it, Notre Dame. This was close game. It wasn't. Ohio State was superior in the trenches, superior on the perimeter, superior at quarterback, superior in the running game. They were the better team. So we're going to go through, kind of get our reaction, kind of what this means for Ohio State. But let's start here, Tyson. What was your thoughts during the game and kind of just immediately after when you saw what took place?
Well, before the game, I was under the impression Ohio State was going to roll. And then during that first drive, I texted you. I said, that was impressive. That was like what Michigan did to Ohio State. Basically, I think that's the same thought everyone had in their heads. But then Ohio State got the ball and scored, and then stopped them and got the ball and scored. And it just kind of felt like, oh, they don't have the horses for this. This isn't your mom's Notre Dame team, right? It's not the ones that we know that went to the national championship and got blown out by Alabama. But it felt like for a little bit in that game, if you squint really hard, like we're right back where we thought we were going to be before this whole thing. But it wasn't an indictment on Notre Dame or Marcus Freeman or any of those guys. This Ohio State team was really good. And Brad, just another game goes by for this Ohio State team, this national championship Ohio State team, where the story is like the running backs who were awesome. Will Howard, great player. Jeremiah Smith, 𝐾𝐿, all those guys. That defensive line came out after that first drive and said, "Tone, and you are not running the football on us for another yard." It was the Remember the Titans style speech. That's kind of what like Ryan Day gets him down there and let him know, like, hey, this is who we are. We got 5 NFL players lacing them up right now. This can't happen. And like Jeremiah Love, like all these guys from Notre Dame that we saw kill people all throughout the season, all throughout the playoff. There was no lanes. The run fits were awesome, and I think that the defense kind of goes by the wayside when you start thinking about all these superstars in the offensive end of the ball. But just another game where Ohio State just said, you are only going to be able to do one thing, and that's throw the football, and we know you're not good at it.
And not good enough, right? Like when Ohio State took their foot off the gas and Notre Dame just kind of spread out and was like, oh, well, this is kind of what we have to do and throw the ball down the field. It was effective, but Tyson, it's one of those things, right? Like we look at that and everybody says, well, why didn't Notre Dame do that from the beginning?
It wouldn't have worked from the beginning.
Right. And Ohio State was like, we're going to win. We're winning. We're going to win this game. And they took their foot off the gas. Like that's been something that we've been critical of Ryan Day in the past, where it's like, oh, we're up. And all of a sudden the team starts coming back. The opponent starts coming back. They get a little tight. And then we see what happens sometimes in big games for Ohio State under Ryan Day. It happened to Michigan for the past however many years, right? But, Tyson, you point out the defensive line, and this is why those guys came back, right? Like the guys on the perimeter, JTT, Jack Sawyer, like some of the big name guys, that's why they wanted to come back. It was similar to what Michigan did last year, where they had unfinished business, and that's what they did. They took care of it. And you mentioned it. Jadarian Price, 3 carries, 13 yards. Jeremiah Love, 4 carries, 3 yards. Now, he came into this banged up, and so that's why Riley Leonard had to carry the ball 17 times. Like they really had one running back in Price, and Jeremiah Love, who was banged up, and it really was a non-factor there. So, Tyson, this was a game that Ohio State should have won. They're 8.5-point favorites. This was, was the largest wager I'd placed all season, thinking that Ohio State was going to roll here. Now, it got sweaty at the end, needed that field goal to cover, and it shouldn't have been that far. But, just looking at everything, Notre Dame, you have to give credit for their resilience because they were banged up coming in. You lose a ton in the trenches. You lose some playmakers. And they easily could have just rolled over and said, you know what, we're getting our ass kicked. Let's get out of here. We made it this far, boys. And Marcus Freeman, and we'll kind of talk about some questionable decisions he had before we move into just Ohio State big picture. But, for him to have his guys ready to play coming out of the locker room, and when they kind of had the momentum and forced the fumble on Igbokwe, for them to be able to turn around and get in the end zone and like, okay, let's go. Let's get some momentum. I thought that was impressive because Notre Dame was playing like just man down from so many injuries they accrued throughout the entire season. So once again, you got to tip your hat a little bit to what Marcus Freeman was able to do for the Fighting Irish this year.
No doubt. And I bristle a little bit when I hear some things like on the radio or reading articles today that are like, well, the game was won by Ohio State on the first drive of the third quarter because Ryan Day had that group ready to play and Notre Dame came out flat. That's not what happened. Notre Dame came out fired up and ready to go, trying to take the ball back so they can get back into this football game. And Ohio State just had better players. They just had a better game plan. And that's the way it goes sometimes. But it is funny with like, oh, they weren't ready to go to start that second half. Yes, they were. They just got ran over by a freight train who – 4 hours before kick, people are saying it's just the best college football team ever, all this stuff, and then the game starts and you forget about it. They're really good, and Notre Dame did what you can try to do against that team. Like Jeremiah Smith doesn't touch the ball for the majority of the second half until he wins the game. It's hard to take away 8+ players for that long. Travion Henderson and Judkins went crazy. That's what they do. That's what they did to everybody. It's a really hard offense to prepare for. It took just a voodoo situation with Michigan. Ryan Day can't beat those guys, and so sometimes it's on the helmet. Like whatever teams were rolling up that day, Michigan might have won that game, and then like a crazy last second slide against Oregon on the road. Otherwise, they might have gone undefeated. And we're talking about them with 2019 LSU, 2001 Miami, those kind of things, but. Yes, Marcus Freeman had him ready to go, and we'll talk about him too. But last thing really on Ohio State for me, can we leave Ryan Day alone for like a couple months? Like, does this buy him enough time? Like, I've been preeminent, the number one hater, I think, on this podcast at least, of Ryan Day, but like national champion solidified. Like, there's nothing else to say. There's only a handful of guys with a ring. Yes, he's at one of the better programs of all time, and it's easier to win there than it is at Coastal Carolina. But he won it, and that's more than a lot of guys in college football can say. Lane Kiffin is famous as hell, and he's never won a game even close to as big as that.
Yeah, and I'll kind of answer that. We move into the Ohio State big picture because I do think there's a lot to discuss from that front on not just Ohio State, but Ryan Day. I think it's two separate entities when we look at it and then kind of combine it into one. But I want to get your thought on the Marcus Freeman thing because, there were questionable decisions. This is a guy that we've crushed during his career at points, and I think turned the corner this year. I think, it's hard to be a head coach, and it's hard to be a head coach at Notre Dame, right? Like there's two different levels. Like you can be the head coach at Old Dominion. You can be the head coach at Texas State. There's coach, and it's a hard job, right? You're the head coach, got to be in charge of 105 guys, and they're college kids, and they're getting in trouble, and you got a huge staff, and you have recruiting, and you got to deal with parents and boosters, all this stuff. Then amplify that when you're a head coach at Notre Dame, when you're taking over for Brian Kelly, who really ran that program, kind of took him from the ashes. I know people hate to hear that, but he was getting the program to the point where what we should be in national championships, and that's one of the reasons why Brian Kelly left, because people didn't think he was getting them to that point where they should be. It was a tough couple years early for Marcus Freeman, I thought. This was the year that he really turned the corner after that Northern Illinois loss. And then this game, there were some questionable decisions. When they went 4 on 4th down with the fake punt, that was the worst time to do a fake punt. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody and their mom knew that was the point.
They're calling
when
it
you
on
were
the
going to try to do a fake punt.
They're calling it on the booth.
And keep your offense on the field. You had just converted, just do a Riley Leonard dive or whatever the case may be. It was working in those spots. So that was a bad decision. I thought the field goal, I know he's getting crushed for that, and I can kind of understand that one a little bit more because they had 10 yards or 8 yards, whatever they had to do to score. So it's like, all right, let's just get some points here. But you can't kick to make it a 2-score game when it's already a 2-score game. It just makes no sense. Plus, you could have pinned them back further if you didn't get it. Like, I don't know. I mean, that was a questionable decision, Tyson. But I do think this was the right step for Notre Dame and for Marcus Freeman. Now, it looks like Al Golden is going to leave the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. I think that's a huge loss because he's going to be hired by the Bengals as we're recording now. That's the expectation. But I think this is the most positive things have felt around Notre Dame in a decade.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'll just kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. Like, I didn't like the fake punt call either. Catch the ball. Like, catch the ball, and we're not having this conversation. Like, he was covered, but he was open enough, and the throw wasn't great, but it was good enough. And those are situations you need to convert in a national championship game. And who knows? So he catches that pass. Maybe we're sitting here right now talking about him the same way people talk about Dan Campbell. Can you believe that he had the guts to do that and won them the football game? And then, like, the field goal is an impossible situation, I think, because they hadn't. To that point in the game, like, there had been some chunks, but they were having a heck of a time, especially down there in that red area where we know Ohio State is the best in the country at. I think you got to go, but I'm not going to sit here because this is one of the things now with the 12-team playoff. This isn't like, Marcus Freeman went through, didn't have to play a conference championship game, got to play the independent schedule, and then got into the national championship game. They had to beat good teams to get here, and he made a lot of really good decisions in those games. So I'm not going to crucify him for some questionable stuff in his first national championship game appearance. If anything, these are learning moments. There's plenty of good college coaches through history have lost the first time they've gotten to the show, and then they've figured out what went wrong.
Yep, I agree. I mean, one moment isn't defining. So I think in the moment you can be like, dude, you got to figure it out. And like you said, it doesn't mean he can't come back from it and learn it if you're Marcus Freeman. So let's get into this though. So what does this mean for Ohio State? Because, and you posed the question before, can we stop kind of getting on Ryan Day? And so when we did our preseason show, Tyson loves Dan Lanning. I love Dan Lanning, but he's going to walk in and be the best coach in the Big Ten. I said, that's a little disrespectful to Ryan Day. I think Ryan Day probably still is. And they had their battles. Ryan Day is the national champion. Finally, right? It's been 11 years since the Buckeyes won a national championship. Ryan Day's been close. No cigar. This finally gets the monkey off his back. So I want to quickly hit on two things. I'll throw it to you, kind of get your thoughts. Yes, this should take the pressure off Ryan Day. The sickos in Columbus who wanted them fired because he can't beat Michigan, I think, 3 games in a row, something like that. I'm just completely absurd. The guy's a really good head coach. If he was fired by Ohio State, he'd have a job tomorrow, probably in the NFL, probably at another power school, or definitely at another power school, probably in the NFL too. So that notion was ridiculous. What this does for Ryan Day, though, all of a sudden it validates everything that he is as a coach at Ohio State. Nobody's looking around and saying, do we have the right guy anymore? He has the championship. He was leading them to a bunch of winning seasons, and now finally has a trophy on his mantle. Now, what does this mean for Ohio State? They are now back as a superpower, right? Like, you could always point to them. Yeah, they win a ton of games. Yes, they win the Big Ten, but they can't beat the SEC. They can't win the national championship. Only Urban could do that. Only Jim Tressel could do it. The current iteration, we don't know if Ohio State can. Well, not anymore. Recruits already come out and saying that's huge. The blue chip recruits are saying this is huge for Ohio State. Like they needed any more help. But, that's just the way it goes, right? Like the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Texases, the Oregons, and all of a sudden, Ohio State winning this is huge for the program. So combining these two things with, yes, Ryan Day, this was huge that he finally won the national championship for him personally, combining that with the fact that Ohio State has looked in the light like, oh, no, they are the caliber of national champs. So they're close, but they kicked through the door. I think that combination now puts Ohio State in the conversation. Are they going to be this version of Alabama, right? Because we had the Georgia 2 years. I think it's fallen off a little bit. Ohio State has tons of NIL money, and we'll talk about that. Ohio State has tons of backing from their boosters. Ohio State recruits at a high level, and Ohio State can get transfers, and we've seen them do that. All of a sudden, we're looking at the monkeys off the back, the coaches' monkeys off the back. Everybody's happy in Columbus. This thing could be a rocket ship.
Yeah, I think so too. I think not sleeping giant's the wrong word because they're just a giant. They've been a giant, but they don't have the hardware to show for it. And when they lost to Michigan, it got real loud. That, like, Ryan Day, it's just not going to work. He just can't do it. Well, he just did it. And so at that point, you just kind of look at him the same way. Like, I know it's not the same sport, but how many college basketball coaches, Brad, can you think of off the top of your head that just couldn't get it done and win the national championship? So they were frauds and they sucked. But meanwhile, we got statues of some of these guys like Roy Williams or Coach K or whatever that didn't win as much as you think when you look back at it in your head. You have them as like Bill Belichick figures where they win 7 times. If he can sprinkle a few more of these things, and not only is he the best coach in Ohio State history, but he's pushing for a spot like on the Mount Rushmore. It happens fast in college sports, and I think that's something to keep in mind here, especially in this landscape. But as far as what this means for Ohio State, I think it means that they're national champions, but I don't expect a ton to change. Like they're already one of, if not the most talented program in the country coming into every single football season. To be honest with you, what this means for Ohio State to me was that they can kind of ragtag these group of coordinators and guys that come in and do the analyst work, and they've pinpointed who they need to win now. Because as much as we give on Ryan Day for losing, there were some moments where it was like, wow, this offensive game plan sucks today, or wow, this defense is not in the right spot. And yeah, that's on the head coach too, but they got it figured out now to the point where they lived wherever Tennessee wanted to go. They knew exactly what Oregon was going to do to them on the defensive side of the football and on offense. And then they did it in the national championship. So I think, sure, they could be the new Bama or the new Georgia, or they're just going to be Ohio State, Brad. And like that, this is a team that we grew up watching go to national championships. We didn't see them win a ton, but like they just won one, and I expect them to be back in this 12-team playoff until for eternity, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that I guess I'm trying to make, and you said it a little bit more eloquently than me. We shouldn't be saying, "Oh, are they Alabama or are they Georgia now?" Like this is the Ohio State University.
Yeah, this is
right?
not a poverty thing.
It's not, and we should be looking at, they should be looked at as, okay, this is the team to beat this year. Like we looked at Alabama when Nick Saban was there, right? Like that's just the reality of it, and it's been that way in Big Ten country. It's like, okay, you're going to have to beat Ohio State
20 years
now. And I know that's a Penn State fan, right? Like Penn State was knocked out of the CFP and the 4-teamer because they couldn't beat Ohio State. And so they've been the big bad wolf in the Big Ten for a long time. Harbaugh finally flips the script, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, is Ohio State no longer the top dog? Now, this, though, is, okay, now nationally we can do it. We beat Tennessee, SEC. We beat Texas, who's a power, now in the SEC. And then we beat Notre Dame. And not like it's, oh my God, they've been dominant in college football, but it's a name brand. It's one of them having a great season. It's been a solid defense. And that's just where we're at now with Ohio State. So, I agree with you. I mean, it shouldn't do anything for them because this is the expectation in Columbus. Ohio State wins national championships. But the reality is it had been 11 years. 11. Like, it's crazy to think about. But that's where this program was. Tyson, Clemson won 2. The big chokers. Georgia won 2. The big chokers, right? Like those Georgiaing and Clemsoning were adjectives. And they had won 2 before Ohio State had won 1 in this period. Like, it's crazy to think about.
It's because Ohio Stating doesn't roll off the tongue the same way.
That's fair. So it'll be interesting to see, Tyson. I mean, I think they're going to be, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think they're going to be ranked, if not 1, 2, definitely 3 in the early preseason rankings and kind of how we go look about things. But they're losing a lot. And so I'm curious to see if this is more like what happened with Michigan this season or if they're going to be able to kind of run things back. But that's for later. We'll talk about kind of our roadmap coming up. But let's talk about the 12-team playoff immediately, because I think, and this was ridiculous, we said this, pump the brakes on the complaints about the 12-team playoff because, we didn't think that Indiana should have been there. And it turns out their margin of victory or the margin of defeat was slimmer than anybody else who lost in the opening weekend. And then, Tyson, it turned into, I thought, just a great product. Now, I think I don't want to go too far into this because I want to get your first thoughts and we'll kind of talk about some tweaks that could be coming. But my God, people, this was fantastic. The 12-teamer worked. It was incredible. Not only was the regular season more people interested because you could make the 12-teamer, but then when we got to it, it was like, holy smokes, this is an actual tournament, an actual gauntlet, and the best team, Ohio State, won.
Yeah, I think that was like the main thing. I'm not on a lot of social media, so I didn't see it during the game. But I have to imagine that the discourse was less focused on like, this is what happens when you don't have a true playoff. You get Notre Dame in the national championship. They beat people to get there. Like there is no argument to stand on when you're trying to say like this wasn't a worthy national championship or these two teams weren't worthy. Ohio State might be the most worthy national champion that we've had at the FBS level in a long time. Basically, just based off the way that this worked. And yes, there will be tweaks and stuff, but the Arizona State-Texas game was magical. And like I think that we're going to get more stuff like that. And it's important to remember, people, sometimes blowouts happen, not only in sports, but especially in college sports. And when you get some of these teams that had a magical season, your SMUs, your Boise States, whoever it is, and then they got to go play Penn State with 15 future NFL players on the roster at any given time, it's just going to be tough. I thought that the 12-team playoff was awesome. I'm ready to go to 18 and 24. I want it to get as big as they're going to let it go. But if you're complaining about this today, you just got to go outside and touch some grass.
And if you're complaining, then you're not a real college football fan, I don't think. Like, well, you just want everything to be utopia.
You're a fringe fan.
Then you're, yeah, as Herbie would say. And Tyson, I think it's not just in college sports where there's blowouts. How about, I mean, I know this is a college episode, but the divisional round, before the Bucks and the Commanders game was so close, the margin of victory and defeat was more in the NFL than it was in the early round of the college football playoff. So the whole thing was just a sham that people were complaining about. They wanted to find something to complain about. They were pissed that, oh, precious Alabama was left out, even though they lost 3 times. Like, it was a complete joke. And so they clutched their pearls too early. This was a great thing. And I think they're going to go to 14. And I think they're going to have some tweaks to the format, all this stuff. But as a premise, 12-team was the right decision. I'm glad it went that way. Now, they need to figure out the calendar because there was absolutely no buzz for this football game. And this is Ohio State and this is Notre Dame. Playing on Monday, first of all, should not happen. Get that out. I don't care what the TV thing says. ESPN needs to come in and say, no, we're going to do this on Saturday. Also, if you're going to – let's get rid of some of the games. Now, maybe that's something we can talk about for the offseason, but I think it ran too late. Everybody's focused on the NFL playoffs right now. Like, it needs to be – let's back this thing up. I know Joel Klatt said January 1st. That's the day. I think that's too soon. There was a ton of buzz 2 weeks ago during the semifinal. I thought that was the time that you can kind of put an end to it. Too late. We'll figure things out from there. And the seeding stuff – that's for another show, I think. But I just think for right now, my initial thoughts on this thing, great product, needs to back it up in the calendar a little bit because I think it went on for a little bit too long.
Yeah, I think if you could time it up to like coincide with week 18 of the NFL, you'd have a heck of a lot better time than trying to compete with the playoffs. And that's the reason it's on Mondays, because the NFL gets Saturday and Sunday for the wild card and the divisional. And maybe, as we move on here and the NFL goes to 18 games, then there'll be more opportunities for college football to just take a Saturday, and we'll find that out. But the timing thing is weird, but that's just there's so many other people involved that, like, are you going to go ask Roger Goodell, hey, I know that you're whooping us in ratings, but please, can we have this Saturday? Brad, one thing that I would like to see tweaked, but this is personal, and I understand if people disagree. I don't think that the top non-Power 4 conference should get a bye in a home game. I think that whatever ranking they get, they should go to the playoff, absolutely. I think it should coincide with wherever they are ranked in the college football playoff poll. And now if they're 15, but they're the top group of 14, that's easy. Put them at 12, and they go on the road and play somebody. Well, that's not fair. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. You have a harder road by the nature of the way this thing works, and it's always going to be that way because – like, you lose out on the money of having those guys go to your place, and that's a huge blow. So it's going to be hard to get them on board with that. But they're gonna be outgunned 99% of the time that these games happen. Are you going to punish your Penn State? And you have to now go on the road across the country to go beat the crap out of somebody else just because they dominated the Mountain West or Conference USA or whatever it is going forward. So that's one. And I do have an idea on the scheduling fix, Brad, but this goes back to another personal bias. How about no week 0? How about everyone starts week 1 and you can make week 1 into week 0? I don't care timeline wise, but why are we having 7 games a week before the rest of the people play? And then we have 4 bye weeks for these college teams throughout the season. Like, what are we doing? Just if everybody starts the season at the same time, everybody can end the season at the same time. And then we can sync these things up.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say it right now for the folks that are listening. We're going to do a separate episode on fixing the CFP, fixing college football. I'm laying that out right now because this is something that Tyson and I have talked about for a while. We're going to take our time, get our thoughts down. We're going to craft some things together. So I'm going to move on to this because you mentioned Penn State. So I know, if you're not a Penn State fan, you're like, shut up. So I'm going to make this quick. I just have to give my thoughts on this Penn State thing because I know tons of people were talking about it and I wasn't able to come on and do an episode here. Penn State should have been in the national championship game. Like Penn State should have been playing Ohio State. They should have beat Notre Dame. That's a game that you have to win. There is no defense that you can have for the program at this point in time. I can come on here and say, oh, this and that, and well, it's unfair for you to criticize James Franklin to not winning a big game. All that went out the window when they lost to Notre Dame. Was it James Franklin's fault? Did he screw up? No. Was it all Drew Allar's fault? No, but he had a big part in the reason why they lost. This was what we've been talking about, and I think the national media has been talking about for Penn State. They just can't get it done when it matters. And that's a game Ohio State loses to people on the offensive side. Your best player, Abdul Carter, is playing with half of his body, and he's wrecking the game. Denied Dennis Sutton on the other side steps up and plays the best game that he's played. And yet somehow, after dominating the first half, they found a way to lose. And that's the reality of where we're at with the program. I don't think that means that James Franklin should be fired. They just finished 5th in the AP poll. It's the highest ranking they've ever had under James Franklin. It's the right step in the right direction. We're talking about this. It's 11 years later since he took over, one Big Ten championship, one appearance, tons of losses to Ohio State, and that doesn't look good. But at the same time, Tyson, if the 12-teamer was in from the very beginning of Franklin's tenure, how many times is Penn State in the 12-team playoff? How many times
11.
does Penn State make it to the semifinal? Maybe a good amount, maybe not. Maybe it's the same conversation, but I think Penn State's in the right direction. And I'm moving it forward here because there's really no defense that you can have for losing Notre Dame. Penn State's going to be really good next year. Penn State lost their 2 leading receivers in the transfer portal, Amari Evans and Trey Wallace. I'm not shedding a tear for that. That wide receiving situation, I'm sorry, you just throw it out the window. It didn't work. Let's figure it out. Maybe it's not as good. I don't know, but you can't run it back. But Nick Singleton back, 𝐾 Allen back, huge. Drew Aller turned down the NFL, he's back. That's huge. Basically, the entire offensive line is back. This has been a program that's had terrible offensive lines. All of a sudden, they are at the point where they have in the trenches, they can compete with anybody. They dominated Notre Dame. Ohio State just did the same thing. It looked exactly the same. On the defense, you're going to have young guys that have stepped up. You're going to have to replace Abdul Carter. Deion Barnes used to play at Penn State when I was there. Really good recruiter. They got a bunch of guys. Going to have to find a new defensive coordinator. But Tyson, this next year is the Michigan, the Ohio State that we just saw, Penn State. Young guys stepping in, old guys staying. That's when it has to happen for Penn State. Now, is it going to happen? We'll see. We'll have a ton of offseason talk about it. I'll give some little bit more thoughts on kind of Drew Aller as we look ahead and things like that and how this offense can look. But those are my thoughts of where I stand with Penn State right now. Can't really defend what happened against Notre Dame. Even the most staunch guys, you kind of look at it and say, hey, we missed out on a big opportunity. But looking ahead, this is, I think, the best situation this program has been in under James Franklin. I think it's only going to continue to go up.
Yeah, it's like best situation in 40 years. It feels like for next year at Penn State. It kind of feels like we're getting towards the territory of national championship or bust, Brad, which is a fun place to live as a college football fan, but maybe not as an alumnus. That feels a little bit more scary. I can't believe that you said it's Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. This is more Dan Lanning erasure from you, from the number 1 team in the country all the way until they weren't. The Big Ten is going to continue to roll college football. I think that is something I'm comfortable saying. I want, my LSU Tigers to win national championships. But again, I want Bama to lose every game. I want Georgia to lose every game. I want Florida to lose every game. I am here for a Big Ten takeover, and 2 national championships in a row is a pretty good way to start.
Yes, it is. And I guess I kind of say those versions, like the Michigan gets all their guys back and they stay one last ride. And because Oregon's going to be they're going to be really good next year. I'll be curious to see what they do at quarterback. But, yeah, that is scary to think about. So let's get into this offseason roadmap. Tyson and I were talking about what we want to do and what we're envisioning. I don't want to promise anything or in under delivery here. So we're just going to kind of talk about what we're looking to do. So a lot of it's going to be infused with draft stuff. And that we're big on the draft. And, NFL and college football are seamless when it comes to this. It's just genius. It's basically the minor leagues for the NFL. It's just completely ridiculous how college basketball and the NBA can't figure this out. But that'll be seamless. We'll talk about some transfer stuff. We'll talk about coaching carousel. We'll talk about way too early top 25, NIL, rev share. We got to discuss this. I know a ton of people are kind of curious what the hell is going on that front. So we're going to have a ton to discuss, Tyson. So I'll throw it to you as like a little roadmap thing that you want to preview as well, because I know you're excited for what we got going on this offseason.
Yeah, I think, setting up as many interviews and learning as much as we can and sharing that kind of stuff with you guys is the plan for what we want to do for this offseason. We also want to make a little maybe next week or the week afterwards, we'll have an episode out for you guys about like things we learned from the college football season. Brad and I do a gambling show once a week too with college football. So it's going to be a lot of like, don't underrate BYU and it's okay to bet on SMU again, stuff like that. But we'll go through what we learned because 2 years ago with the changing of the first down rule, kind of flipped everything gambling wise on its head, because now you weren't blinking at over 69.5 before in some of these matchups, and now you're like, I don't know, clock's running the whole time. So that changed everything, and now we are fully into the NIL era and those kind of things. So that's going to be fun. But Brad, we're also going to have some episodes this offseason that we're just going to go, conference by conference before the season starts, and we'll break down the teams. And we're going to try to do more of that stuff throughout the offseason too, because we understand it gets difficult to pack them all in for us. And it's hard to digest as listeners when it's, these conferences are 20 teams deep now. And so it's tough, but a lot of times Brad and I will have conversations off air that leak their way into on air. And so if we can capture those better throughout the offseason, we'll have more stuff to reference back than just the text messages where we're telling each other in August, hey, Ohio State's going to win the national championship, because we have those. We just didn't say it out loud. And so it's difficult to come on here and pat yourself on the back for a take, stuff like that. But we're sickos, and we just want as much college football as we can. And Brad, it's going to get, in a couple months, we got Bill Belichick to talk about. Like, there's no way we're going more than, we're not letting that get to the season, basically, is what we're trying to say. We'll be here all off season.
Exactly. I mean, it was just a ton of stuff to look forward to. Thanks for going on this journey with us. And I will promise something. What Tyson just said about kind of doing a wrap, that is going to happen next week. So we're going to get our heads together. We're going to kind of look through, have some fun stuff that we're going to talk about. And next week will be a fun one. Then we'll go full off-season mode. It'll be a great time looking ahead. But NFL stuff still going on. That's why you got to like, subscribe, and share the show. Stay connected with us so you don't miss a single thing. Smash that like button so we become more discoverable. We appreciate your support. Subscribe so you don't miss it, right? Like, we got our birds. Tyson's pumped up. We're going to be breaking down everything that just happened. So if you're an NFL fan, stay tuned to that. That's coming out later this week. So until then, guys, peace.